Hey folks, have you ever been curious about the psychology behind why we love playing Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop RPGs? If so, this review is for you. Geek Therapeutics sent over a review copy of The Psychology of Dungeons & Dragons by Jamie Madigan, and I've read the whole thing, so let's dive into the review. And don't forget, this video is partly brought to you by their upcoming Kickstarter. More on that later. So I'm going to talk about each of the 3 sections of this book and then kind of go over my general thoughts about the book at the very end. Starting with part 1, why we play. This section is a treasure trove of insights. It starts broadly asking like, okay, why do we feel heroic while playing? Then zooms in on some more specific aspects like how D&D pulls us into imaginary worlds and why we love collecting things. I think the structure is brilliant. It makes you think, oh, that's why I do that. For game designers, I think part 1 is fantastic. If you understand the psychology behind why certain aspects of the games are so enjoyable to some players, you can design with those elements in mind. Jamie uses D&D as the main framework, but also references other tabletop RPG systems, pointing out, for instance, like how Vampire the Masquerade excels at rewarding roleplay. One of my favorite parts in this section is the discussion of self-determination theory. That's actually a big part of this section, and I'm not going to go into the theory. If you're interested in it, pick up the book. But there was like an anecdote about toddlers wanting control and offering them the illusion of choice that really resonated with me, as I currently have a toddler. But also I can see how that applies very well for game masters of giving your players the illusion of choice so they don't feel railroaded, but they have that player agency. Jamie explores how this theory impacts our enjoyment of games and offers some other alternatives to kind of more negative gameplay mechanics. So for instance, instead of penalizing players with a negative condition, for example, he suggests giving the enemies buffs. This positive reinforcement keeps the fun and agency alive in the game. So that was something I hadn't really thought of, but thinking back to when the enemies have gotten buffs instead of me getting a negative condition, it has felt a little bit more fun. Chapter 3 has some excellent advice for players and GMs alike in how to give feedback to your game master and why that feedback is so important. Now, some of the topics in this book are things we've discussed on this channel, and for me, I've known some of these concepts, and now it's just really great to understand the psychology behind it, why our brains work the way they do. I knew this thing worked before, but it's nice to know, like, oh, there's something backing this up. And there's also plenty of new things I've learned because I read this book. Okay, let's jump into part 2, playing the game. Now, this part digs into the nitty-gritty of sitting down and playing the game, starting with a focus on identifying with your game character and then jumping into the roleplay aspect of the game. The chapter on character identification is packed with some really great concrete examples and advice. Jamie encourages or discourages certain behaviors in ways that it doesn't feel judgmental at all. Specifically in the chapter that mentions bleed and steering, it's more of like a gentle nudge in the right direction of like, hey, here, now you are aware of these things, so you can keep this in mind and potentially avoid it. Jamie does a really great job defining all of the psychological terms, and he provides really great examples, many of them from his own gaming experience or examples from other people that he's chatted with over the years. Chapter 7 is another gem. It explains why we role play and why it's important. It talks about how role play as kids helps shape us, but also why it's still valuable as adults. With a toddler who's just getting into imaginative play, there's a lot that I understood in this section, but also some really great advice that I can now apply in my games. There's some fantastic advice specifically on how to encourage your table to embrace the role play, like actual concrete ways to find the right level of role play for your table and why certain people are going to enjoy different aspects of or levels of role play. Chapter 8 was possibly the chapter that I think had the biggest impact. It discusses the classic D&D alignment chart, why it's flawed, and why, since it's been started, it has never really worked. Instead, it introduces a better morality system based on the moral foundations theory. I'm seriously considering adopting this as a new system in games that I run, and I might even do like a whole separate video on this topic because it's that good. I recently talked about another alternative to the alignment system. I think this actually gives you a little bit better direction for roleplay, but also for the game master to like help steer or remind players like what they decided on for their morality for their character. And, if they go against it, then you can step in and, have their god come down and be like, that's not what we agreed on. The rest of part 2 covers things like superstitions about dice, the decision-making process in-game, and dealing with some decision paralysis. With the decision making, there's great advice for both players and game masters on how to navigate some of these challenges, how to make decisions for like what character you're going to play when there are so many options, and also some advice for game masters on how to avoid giving your players too many options and why actually giving them fewer options make people happier. Hey there, adventurers and fellow geeks. This section of the video is brought to you by the Geek Psychology Series Kickstarter. Dive headfirst into a project that uncovers the rich psychological layers woven into some of the most beloved video games and tabletop RPGs of all times. There are 5 captivating books in this series that explore the thrilling intersection of psychology, gaming, and geek culture. The Geek Psychology series includes The Psychology of Dungeons & Dragons, unveil the hidden psychological dynamics that make D&D an unparalleled adventure. The Gamer's Journey, inspired by Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, this book delves into the psychological threads uniting various games. Discover archetypal stories, transformative storytelling, and how games shape our real-world identities. The Psychology of the Witcher, step into the morally complex universe of the Witcher series. Analyze moral ambiguity, personal identity, and the human condition through rich narratives and gameplay. The Psychology of The Last of Us, examining themes like trauma, resilience, and human connection. Challenge yourself with ethical dilemmas, examine grief, and understand the psychological impact of survival. The second edition of Integrating Geek Culture into Therapeutic Practices. For mental health professionals, this updated edition offers guidance on incorporating gaming and geek culture into therapy. Engage clients with innovative strategies using the unique language of geek culture to promote healing and personal growth. Each book will be available in paperback, hardcover, audiobook, and Kindle editions. So what are you waiting for? Join them on this epic quest to explore the fascinating blend of psychology and geek culture. Together, let's uncover the hidden depths of our favorite games and stories. Back the Geek Psychology series today. All right, let's talk about the third section of the book, party dynamics. This final part of the book focuses on the interpersonal aspects of D&D. It covers topics like party dynamics, in-person versus online gaming, and how D&D can improve skills and mental health. Chapter 11 is really fantastic. It offers advice on how to share mental models, I hadn't heard that term before, to work better together. It also warns against metagaming while stressing the importance of understanding what's going on in the game. So, you've got player knowledge versus character knowledge, and why having a little bit more player knowledge is actually going to be better. I love the advice on brainstorming, which corrected some common misconceptions about the process. Apparently, Osborne's 4 rules of brainstorming aren't the best way to do it. I've been doing it wrong and had people, in my professional life tell me this is the way that we brainstorm. And now I know why those brainstorming sessions just weren't as successful as they felt like they should have been. The book explains better techniques that I plan on using both in my gaming and in my personal life. Now, chapter 16 talks about how playing tabletop RPGs can improve skills and our mental health. Most of this chapter is more for mental health professionals, but I do think if you aren't a mental health professional, there is some things to get out of this, and also it might be something of like, oh, if you really connect with that, maybe you can find a therapist who offers, D&D as part of a therapy session. And Jamie is very clear that if you aren't a mental health professional, you should not try to use it as therapy or try to change your fellow players with the game. This is more for the mental health professionals and kind of as a self-reflection of like, oh, this is why I might be drawn to some of D&D as a skill-building kind of exercise for myself. One final chapter I want to highlight is chapter 15. Does playing Dungeons and Dragons turn kids into devil worshippers? Perfect. No notes. Good job. Okay, so let's talk about my overall impressions of this book. I really enjoyed reading this. It was a delight to read. It's accessible. I think it's very accessible to a wide audience. It explains the psychological theories with concrete examples. So, a layperson can pick this book up and understand and enjoy it. But I also think it dives deep enough that mental health professionals will also get something out of it. Whether that's, understanding clients who enjoy playing D&D or as kind of a primer, to the idea of introducing some of these using games in your therapy. And then you can go pick up the therapeutic practices book. Jamie's love for D&D shines through. It makes the book engaging and relatable. There are a lot of his little anecdotes and little inside jokes that felt very much like I am reading a book that is written by somebody who really loves this hobby and this community. It's filled with all of these anecdotes that any gamer is going to appreciate, and Jamie pulls from a variety of sources, including YouTubers, gaming experts, and the broader community to support his points. Especially like how he related non-gaming studies to tabletop RPGs. It's clear he's done his homework, pulling from workplace environment studies, gambling research, and more to provide a well-rounded perspective, especially since D&D has been studied a lot less in psychology. So it's, okay, let's take some of these other studies and see how it might be applicable to our hobby, while also pointing out there are going to be some differences and things that don't quite translate. At the end of each chapter, there's a great what you learned in this chapter that gives you a brief overview of all of the things that were discussed, and then also a how to apply this chapter to your game. And I think that's really great as a reminder. It is geared very much like it starts out as players. You can blah, blah, blah. As game masters, this. As designers. So that's really great to be able to kind of come back and reference, okay, I want a refresher on, how I as a player can get more involved in the creation of the lore that goes into the game. Okay, this is the chapter that taught me about it. Really great because it gives you that easy to apply summary and action items. And there is a very helpful glossary and extensive references for those who want to dive deeper into the studies mentioned. And the glossary is much more actually focused on the tabletop terms and less the psychological terms, because in the chapters he does a really good job explaining all of the psychological terms. So if you are curious about the psychology behind our hobby, definitely check out The Psychology of Dungeons and Dragons by Jamie Madigan, as well as the Geek Psychology series on Kickstarter. It's a fascinating and insightful read that will enhance your understanding and enjoyment of the game. We're also giving away one copy of this book, so follow the link in the description to enter the giveaway. So have you read any other books that kind of dive into some of the psychology of gaming? Have you picked this book up? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. I know Jamie has also he's got a podcast and does videos on some of the topics that have been covered in the book. So if you've watched or listened to some of his videos, I'd love to know what was the thing that you were most surprised at when you learned kind of diving into the psychology of why we like to game. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! A big thanks to all of our patrons, especially Tucker. If you like our videos and want to directly support us, make sure you're subscribed and then head on over to Patreon after this video. Patrons get early access to videos and other perks while helping us make more videos for everyone to enjoy. Let's do the chapter 15. Okay. 14, here's chapter 14. It's so short, I missed it.